Welcome back to The Leftovers. I am your host, Pastor Karl. Here I have with me my co-host, Pastor Nate. Nate, how was Georgia?
It was wonderful. It was muggy and hot.
Give me a temperature.
But 103 degrees. In fact, I'll say this, it was so hot that during the wedding ceremony that I was doing, my iPad overheated.
No way.
It shut down in the middle of the ceremony. And I gave it to one of the groomsmen, who thankfully I knew was good friends with as well too, and just gave him the eye and say, hey man, try to rework it. So unfortunately, it did not come back on, but it was fine.
You did it from memory?
I did, yeah. He looked
impressive.
at me and he said, hey, you got to float from the dome. And I said, here we go. So we did it, but it was muggy and hot.
My iPad would have powered through that.
Yeah.
I would not have. My brain would have been the thing to shut off in that situation. I would have gone from wedding to funeral, like switch between those two things over and over again. I don't know.
I mean, to some people outside in the world, it's the same thing. So.
I've heard that before. If you're one of those guys that talks like that, I'm so sorry about your marriage. It's good. So yeah, we started a new series this last Sunday. It was called, the series is called Wisdom of the Years. Nate, so that I don't butcher it.
Yeah, man.
Can you just explain the purpose of the series? Because I think we could deep dive into this message, but the real goal, 10,000 foot view of the whole series, that's what we want.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so obviously I am on the younger end when it comes to being a pastor. And man, you about to get fired. You laugh at that again. Come on, man. We're not that
I'm sorry.
Age. But anyway, but it's true. We have a younger staff, and I think the tendency for most people is to just move forward with that, right? It's that, what do they call that? That generational bias, the education bias, where each generation feels like they're getting smarter than the previous generation and whatever else. And so a lot of times people often disregard just older advice, people who are elder in the faith. And man, we don't want to do that here. We want to be a multiracial, but at the same time, multi-generational church. And we just believe that the years will teach you what the days will never know. The years will teach you what the days will never know. And then so with that, I just know it's important that to not only have younger voices, but to have older, more seasoned voices to come and preach and speak as well too. And then so, in the series, I've invited different people who are older in the faith, elders in the faith, patriarchs of the faith, to come in. And the question was against the backdrop of their years of experience, right? If they could write a message, speak a message to the church and where we're at today, what would they say, right? What would they say? Because again, the years will teach you what the days will never know. And so Pastor Joe, our former senior pastor who was here for 21 years, he started off our series and he did a great job talking about the end times is what he did. So so that's a little bit about the series itself. Yeah,
I think you did an awesome job. A little preliminary on that. I will agree that there is generational bias, but that's been a thing since the beginning of time.
100%.
I saw generation after generation. I saw newspaper clippings to internet ads to TikTok videos. So that's 3 generations encompassed right there, blaming the previous generation for the current troubles, or vice versa, the generation after them saying that they're so much less than the current generation. So it's always been a thing. It will always be a thing. There's like a semantics, an error of semantics between generations. There's like a language barrier, a cultural barrier between generations. And so I think it's super important that we put the pre-qualifiers on the entirety of the series, because just like you wouldn't pick up Psalms and read Psalms like a history book, you'd read it like, they're poems. That's how they're meant to be interpreted. And you wouldn't pick up a history book and try to read it like a comedy. These messages should be interpreted through that lens. It will always be difficult trying to, when you get older, you'll realize how difficult it is to understand the generation after you, and vice versa. And so that's definitely the lens that we want to process the next few messages through. And PJ's was no exception. It was an awesome message. And there was tremendous amounts of wisdom, and there's no reason why our personal context should prohibit us from receiving what he was trying to say, or what he was saying. So, are you tracking with me?
Yeah,
that makes sense?
100%. Yeah. So, you know, and again, you know, like what Karl said, like in the world, like it's like that. But here in the church, you know, especially here at COC, we try to not make that the case, and we try to honor each generation and learn, right, and glean from them as well too. And so, you know, I wasn't here obviously, but I was listening to it when I was traveling in Georgia. And I know that he talked about you know, eschatology. He talked about the end times, and you know, he laid out a brief timeline. And for those of you guys who may not know, that the world is going to end and that the rapture is going to happen. And I know, right? Mind blown. And then so, you know, what you feel right now in this day and age is everything is starting to wind down, right? Second law of thermodynamics, you know, the state of entropy is increasing, and that's only going to increase. And so the reason why is because, you know, all of creation is winding down to this point. You know, I've heard many Bible scholars talk about that we're not just in the end times, we're like at the end of the end times. We're not just in the last chapter, we're in like the last few pages or paragraphs of the last chapter. And then, so that's where we're at. And he painted that picture beautifully about, you know, what that looks like, about how the rapture happens. And what the rapture is it's Jesus taking the saints from the world, right? And then after the rapture happens, then the tribulation begins, 3.5 years, and the great tribulation, 3.5 more years after that, the 7-year period. And then after that happens, then it's the second coming of Christ, that he comes back down. And I love the what do you call it? What am I trying to say? I love the way it describes Jesus when he comes back in the second coming. Sure. Yeah. That he is described as the rider on the white horse whose robe is dripped in blood, that a rod of iron is coming out of his mouth, coming to rule the nations. And I'm like, man, like that just sounds gangster to me. I don't know how else to put it. And then so, you know, then right, for Jesus. And then after that, the millennial reign happens where Satan is thrown into the bottomless pit. Then 1,000 years, you know, ends, and then he comes back up and tries to deceive the nations one more time. Then the big giant war happens. And then finally you have the great white throne judgment, and then he's thrown into the lake of fire. And then so that's how the world ends. And if you don't believe me, look at Revelation and then go in and read that book. But I will say this, if you just recently gave your heart to the Lord, that might not be the place you want to start. So
let's back up a little.
Yeah, back up. What happened?
I was cutting someone's hair this morning, and he told me he got saved while watching